Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of horror stories that you can listen to while you fall asleep. Before the video begins, let us know what time is it, and where you are listening from. Also, if you have suggestion for next horror story settings, let us know in the comments. Now let's begin. I need to tell someone about what happened at the warehouse. 3 months have passed, and I still wake up in cold sweats, checking the locks on my doors. The police closed the case. They said there wasn't enough evidence. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. It started on a Tuesday night in October. I was working the graveyard shift at Morrison Industrial Storage, one of those massive concrete buildings on the edge of town where companies keep their overflow inventory. The pay was decent and the work was simple. Walk the perimeter every 2 hours, check the loading docks, make sure nobody was trying to break in. Easy money for a college student like me. The building was enormous. 40,000 square feet of concrete floors and metal shelving that stretched up into shadows the fluorescent lights couldn't quite reach. During the day, it buzzed with forklifts and workers. But at night, it became something else entirely. Every footstep echoed. Every creak of settling metal made you jump. That Tuesday started normal enough. I clocked in at 11, grabbed my flashlight and radio from the security office, and began my first round. The autumn wind was picking up outside, rattling the corrugated metal siding. I'd worked there for 6 months and knew every sound the building made. The hum of the ventilation system, the occasional pop of expanding metal, the distant rumble of late-night trucks on the highway. But around 1 in the morning, I heard something new. It was faint at first, a rhythmic tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on a table. I stopped walking and listened. The sound seemed to be coming from somewhere deep in the warehouse, past the main aisles where they stored automotive parts. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Patrol. I'm hearing some unusual sounds in Sector 7. Going to investigate." Static crackled back. "Copy that, Patrol. Probably just the wind. Check it out and report back." I made my way toward the sound, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness between the towering shelves. The tapping grew louder as I got closer, more deliberate, more human. When I rounded the corner into aisle 42, I found the source. There was a man sitting on the floor between 2 pallets of boxed merchandise. His back was to me, and he was tapping his finger against a metal shelf bracket. Tap, tap, tap. Rhythmic and steady. My heart started pounding. How had someone gotten inside? I'd checked all the doors myself just 2 hours earlier. "Hey!" I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You're not supposed to be here." The tapping stopped, but the man didn't turn around. "Sir, I need you to stand up and face me. This is private property." Still nothing. He just sat there, perfectly still. I moved closer, my flashlight trained on him. He was wearing dark clothes and had shoulder-length hair. As I got within 10 feet, I could see that his head was tilted at an odd angle, like he was looking up at something on the shelves. "Sir, I'm calling the police if you don't respond." That's when I noticed the smell. Sweet and cloying, like fruit that had been left to rot. It got stronger the closer I got. I was maybe 5 feet away when I finally saw what he was looking at. There was a small mirror propped up on one of the shelves, angled down toward where he sat. In the reflection, I could see his face. His eyes were wide open, staring. His mouth hung slack, and his skin had a waxy, gray pallor that made my stomach lurch. He wasn't tapping anymore, because he couldn't tap anymore. He was dead. Had been for a while, from the look of him. But that's not the part that still keeps me awake at night. The part that haunts me is what I saw next in that mirror. Standing directly behind me, close enough that I should have heard him breathing, was another man. Very much alive. Very much watching me discover the body. I spun around, but there was nobody there. Just empty aisle and shadows. My flashlight beam swept frantically across the concrete floor, the metal shelving, the pallets of inventory. Nothing. When I looked back at the mirror, the reflection showed only me and the corpse. I ran. I ran straight to the security office and called the police, my hands shaking so hard I could barely dial. When they arrived, they found the body exactly where I'd said it would be. John Henley, 34 years old, reported missing by his family 3 weeks earlier. The coroner determined he'd died of exposure and dehydration. But here's what the police couldn't explain, and what the newspapers never reported. The warehouse had been locked up tight every night for those 3 weeks. I had the key logs to prove it. Every door, every window, every loading dock had been secured. There was no way John Henley could have gotten inside. and there was no way he could have arranged that mirror by himself. The detective who worked the case told me people sometimes do strange things when they're dying. Hallucinations. Desperate attempts to signal for help. Maybe he'd found the mirror somewhere and positioned it hoping someone would spot his reflection. Maybe. But that doesn't explain what I saw standing behind me. And it doesn't explain what I found the next morning when I went back to collect my things. Sitting on the desk in the security office was a photograph. It showed the interior of the warehouse, aisle 42 specifically, taken from up high looking down. In the photo, John Henley sat between the pallets, very much alive, looking up at the camera with an expression of pure terror. Written on the back in careful block letters was a date, the night I found him, and below that a single word, next. I quit that job and moved across the state. Changed my name, my phone number, everything. But sometimes, late at night when I'm walking alone, I catch a glimpse of my reflection in a shop window or a car mirror. And standing behind me, just out of sight, I swear I can see someone watching. Someone patient. Someone who knows exactly where I am. Someone who's very good at getting into locked places. The babysitter. I have to tell someone what really happened that night at the Morrison house. The police report says home invasion. The newspapers called it a tragedy. But they don't know what I know. They weren't there when it started. I was 17 and babysitting for extra cash. The Morrisons were good people, paid well, and their daughter Emma was sweet. 8 years old with gap teeth and pigtails. She loved bedtime stories and hot chocolate. That Friday in November, they were going to dinner downtown. Mr. Morrison showed me around like always. Emergency numbers on the fridge. Emma's bedtime at 9. Pizza money on the counter. Everything seemed normal until they left. I was helping Emma with homework when she looked up from her math sheet. "Sarah, why is that man watching our house?" My stomach dropped. "What man, honey?" She pointed toward the front window. "He's been standing by the mailbox since Mommy and Daddy left, just looking at our house." I walked to the window and peeked through the curtains. There was someone there, a tall figure in dark clothing standing perfectly still under the streetlight. Too far to make out features, but close enough to see he was facing our direction. Probably just someone waiting for a ride. I told Emma, trying to sound calm. "Let's finish your homework." But when I checked again 20 minutes later, he was still there. Same position. Same unnatural stillness. I called Mrs. Morrison. No answer. Probably already at the restaurant. By 8:30, Emma was getting ready for bed. I helped her brush her teeth and pick out pajamas, but I kept glancing toward the windows. The man hadn't moved. Not once. "Sarah, you look scared," Emma said as I tucked her in. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just tired." I forced a smile. "Want me to read you a story?" She nodded, and I grabbed her favorite book. But as I started reading, I heard something that made my blood freeze. The soft scrape of footsteps on gravel. Someone walking up the driveway. I stopped reading. Emma noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Stay right here, okay? Don't come downstairs." I crept to the staircase and listened. The footsteps had stopped, but now I could hear something else. A gentle tapping on the front door. 3 soft knocks. I waited. Maybe they would go away. 3 more knocks. Then silence. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but before I could hit call, I heard Emma scream. I ran upstairs. She was sitting up in bed, pointing at her bedroom window. "He's out there. He's looking at me." I rushed to the window. There was a face pressed against the glass. Male, middle-aged, with hollow eyes and a blank expression. He wasn't moving, just staring directly at Emma's bed. I yanked the curtains closed and grabbed Emma. "We're going downstairs right now." As we reached the living room, the tapping started again. But this time it wasn't at the front door. It was coming from the back door, then the side door, then windows all around the house. Like someone was circling the building, testing every entry point. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "There's someone trying to break into the house I'm babysitting at. 1247 Maple Street. Please hurry." The operator kept me on the line, but the tapping was getting more aggressive. Harder, more insistent. Then it stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. Emma clung to me, crying quietly. We sat on the couch in the dark, afraid to turn on lights that might give away our location. 5 minutes passed. 10. I started to think maybe he'd given up. That's when I heard the sound that still wakes me up screaming. The slow creak of the basement door opening. He was inside. Had been inside. While we were running around checking windows and doors, he'd found another way in. Footsteps on the basement stairs. Slow, deliberate, coming up. I grabbed Emma and ran for the front door, fumbling with the locks. Behind us, I could hear him reach the main floor. Heavy boots on hardwood. Getting closer. I got the door open just as police sirens wailed in the distance. We ran outside screaming. The officers found the basement window broken. Small fragments of glass on the floor. But they never found him. Searched the whole house, the neighborhood, everything. Like he'd vanished. The Morrisons came home to police cars and ambulances. Emma was traumatized but physically fine. I gave my statement and went home, thinking it was over. But the next morning, I found something in my locker at school. A photograph, black and white, taken from inside the Morrison house. It showed me and Emma huddled on the couch, exactly as we'd sat during those terrifying minutes in the dark. At the bottom, someone had written in neat handwriting, "Next time, don't call the police." That was 6 months ago. I've changed schools twice since then. My parents moved us to a different town. New house, new phone number, everything. But sometimes I still get photos. Always black and white. Always showing me when I think I'm alone. At school. At home. Walking to my car. The most recent one came yesterday. It shows me sleeping in my new bedroom. Taken from inside my room while I slept. On the back, the same careful handwriting. Soon. I need to warn people about the apartment complex on Cedar Avenue. Building C, Unit 304. The rent was too good to be true, and now I know why. I moved in last September. Fresh out of college, new job, excited about independence. The landlord, Mrs. Chun, seemed nice enough. Showed me around the 2-bedroom unit, explained the lease terms. Everything looked perfect. The first month was normal. I loved having my own space. The neighbors were quiet. The building felt safe. But in October, things started getting weird. It began with the sounds. Every night around 2 in the morning, I'd hear footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate pacing back and forth outside my door. I figured it was just someone who worked night shifts or had insomnia. But then I noticed the footsteps always stopped directly in front of my apartment. 4 minutes at a time. Like someone was standing there listening. One night I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. But I could still hear the footsteps, clear as day, right outside my door. That's when I realized the sounds weren't coming from the hallway. They were coming from above me, from Unit 404. The next day I asked Mrs. Chun about my upstairs neighbor. Her face went pale. "There is no Unit 404, she said. "That floor was damaged in a fire years ago. It's been sealed off ever since." I stared at her. "But I hear someone walking around up there every night." She shook her head firmly. "Impossible. No one has access to that floor." That night, I paid closer attention. The footsteps started at exactly 2:17 a.m., pacing back and forth directly above my bedroom, sometimes stopping at what would be right over my bed. I grabbed a chair and climbed up to examine my ceiling. In the corner, I found something that made my skin crawl. A small hole, maybe the size of a dime, drilled through the plaster. When I held a flashlight to it, I could see straight through to the floor above. Someone had been watching me sleep. I called the police the next morning. They came out, but Mrs. Chun insisted the upper floor was sealed. She showed them the heavy chain and padlock on the stairwell door marked, "Authorized personnel only." Everything looked secure, but the officer noticed something I'd missed. Fresh scratches around the lock, like it had been opened recently. "We'd like to take a look up there," he told Mrs. Chun. She reluctantly produced a key. We climbed the dark stairwell to the 4th floor. The smell hit us immediately. Stale air, mold, and something else. Something organic and rotten. The floor was a maze of fire-damaged rooms and collapsed ceiling tiles. But in the far corner, directly above my bedroom, someone had cleared out a small space. There was a sleeping bag, empty food containers, and a collection of photographs. Photographs of me. Sleeping, showering, getting dressed. Taken through that hole in my ceiling over the course of weeks. But here's the part that still gives me nightmares. Scattered among the photos were detailed notes about my daily routine. When I left for work, when I came home, what I ate for dinner, what I watched on TV. The handwriting was small and precise. Clinical, like someone documenting a specimen. At the bottom of the pile was a floor plan of my apartment with every room mapped out. My bedroom was circled in red ink. Written beside it, "Best access point." We never found who had been living up there. The sleeping bag was gone by the time detectives returned with proper equipment. But they did find something else that made me pack up and leave that same day. Cut into the floor directly above my bed was a larger hole, big enough for a person to fit through. The edges were smooth, carefully sawed. Recent work. The detective told me whoever had been up there was planning to come down into my bedroom while I slept. I moved out immediately and stayed with friends until I found a new place. But 2 weeks later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph of my new apartment building, taken from across the street. On the back, that same precise handwriting. Found you. I've moved 4 times since then. Changed my name, my job, my phone number. Each time, I think I've finally gotten away. But then another package arrives. Another photograph. Another reminder that someone out there knows exactly where I am. The last one came yesterday. It shows the inside of my current bedroom. My bed. My dresser. My clothes laid out for the next day. But this time there was something else in the photo. A shadow in the corner that shouldn't be there. Human-shaped. Watching. And written on the back, soon. I don't sleep in bedrooms anymore. I can't. Every ceiling looks like a trap door now. Every building could have a hidden floor where someone waits and watches and plans. I'm telling you this as a warning. If you ever see an apartment with rent that's too good to be true, walk away. And if you hear footsteps above you at night, don't assume it's just a neighbor. It might be someone who's been watching you all along. The carpool. I have to tell someone about what happened during my morning commute. The police say there's no evidence of a crime, but I know what I experienced. I know what I saw in that car. 3 months ago, I started carpooling to save money on gas. The app matched me with David, a guy who worked downtown and had the same schedule. Clean driving record, good reviews from other passengers. Seemed perfect. David was quiet but friendly. Mid-30s, wore business suits, drove a spotless gray sedan. Our conversations were polite and brief. Weather, traffic, weekend plans. Normal commuter talk. For 6 weeks, everything was routine. He picked me up at 7:15 sharp every morning. We'd drive the 40 minutes to downtown in comfortable silence, listening to news radio. Then one Tuesday morning in November, I noticed something strange. We were stopped at a red light when David reached into his glove compartment. He pulled out a small notebook and started writing. Quick, neat handwriting. When the light turned green, he closed the notebook and drove on like nothing happened. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was jotting down a reminder or grocery list. But he did it again the next morning. Same intersection, same routine. Notebook out, write something down, put it away. By Friday, I was curious enough to try to see what he was writing. When he opened the notebook at the red light, I leaned slightly forward and glanced over. He was writing about me. Subject: wore blue sweater today. Left house at 7:12. Seemed tired. Yawned 3 times during first 10 minutes of drive. My stomach lurched. Subject? Why was he taking notes about me? I sat back, trying to stay calm. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe he was writing a book or doing research for work. But something about the clinical tone made my skin crawl. The next week, I started paying closer attention to David's behavior. He would glance at me in the rearview mirror when he thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes he'd ask casual questions that seemed designed to get information. Do you live alone in that house? What time do you usually get home from work? Do your neighbors know your schedule pretty well? I gave vague answers, but he kept asking. And he kept writing in that notebook. One morning, I pretended to fall asleep during the drive. Through barely open eyes, I watched David pull out his phone and take pictures of me. Multiple shots from different angles. The camera sound was turned off, but I could see the flash reflect in the windows. When we reached downtown, I got out of the car as quickly as possible. That afternoon, I used a different rideshare service to get home. I was going to cancel the carpool arrangement, but I needed to know what was in that notebook first. The next morning, I got in David's car like normal. But this time, I was ready. When we stopped at the usual red light, David reached for his glove compartment. I quickly said, "Oh, I think I dropped my phone. Can you help me look for it?" While he was distracted, searching around his seat, I grabbed the notebook from the open glove compartment. What I saw inside made me feel sick. Pages and pages of detailed observations about me. My daily routine, my habits, my appearance. When I left home, when I returned. What I wore, what I ate, how I acted. But it wasn't just from our car rides. He had notes about me grocery shopping on weekends, walking my dog in the evenings, having dinner with friends. things he couldn't have observed during our commute. He'd been following me, watching me outside of our carpooling arrangement. The most recent entries were the worst. Detailed floor plans of my house, sketched from multiple angles. Notes about my security system, my daily schedule, when I was home alone. And at the bottom of the last page, written in red ink, ready to proceed. I slipped the notebook back into the glove compartment just as David turned around. "Did you find your phone?" he asked. "Yeah, it was in my bag all along," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The rest of the drive was the longest 20 minutes of my life. When we reached downtown, I got out and immediately called the police. But when they investigated, David claimed the notebook was research for a novel he was writing. The photos on his phone had been deleted. There was no concrete evidence of stalking. I moved apartments the next week and changed my phone number. But David had already learned too much about my life. He knew my workplace, my friends, my habits. The harassment started small. Items moved around in my new apartment when I wasn't home. Photos of me posted anonymously online. My car tires slashed in parking lots. But last month, it escalated. I came home to find a gift box on my doorstep. Inside was a key to my old house, along with a note in David's handwriting. I made copies of everything. The police still say there's not enough evidence for an arrest. They tell me to be careful, to document everything, to call if I see him again. But how do you document someone who knows how to stay just outside the law? How do you prove you're being watched by someone who's made studying you his hobby? Yesterday, I found another note slipped under my apartment door. Just 4 words in that familiar neat handwriting. "I know where you work. I'm looking for a new job now, in a different city. But I can't shake the feeling that no matter where I go, David will find a way to follow. He's had months to study me, to learn my patterns, to figure out how I think. I'm telling you this story as a warning. Be careful who you trust with your routine. That friendly coworker who offers you rides, that helpful neighbor who pays attention to your schedule, that casual acquaintance who asks just a few too many personal questions. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem completely normal. The ones who sit next to you every day taking notes." The night shift nurse. I used to work as a night nurse at Memorial Hospital. Used to. After what happened in room 237, I can never go back to healthcare. The state board revoked my license anyway, said I was having a breakdown. But I know what I saw. I know what really happened to those patients. It started in February when they hired Marcus for the night shift. Quiet guy, early 40s, excellent references from 3 different hospitals. He was professional, efficient, and patients seemed to like him. Perfect employee on paper. I worked the same wing, the cardiac unit. 20 beds, mostly elderly patients recovering from surgery or managing chronic conditions. Marcus usually took rooms 230 through 240. I handled the rest. At first, I was grateful for the help. Night shifts could be brutal when you were understaffed. Marcus picked up extra work without complaining, stayed late when needed, covered for other nurses. Management loved him. But after a few weeks, I started noticing patterns. Patients in Marcus's section seemed to have more complications. Nothing dramatic, just small things. A slight fever here, unexpected nausea there. Blood pressure readings that didn't quite match their charts. Always minor enough to be explained away by their existing conditions. What bothered me was how Marcus handled these situations. He was calm, almost pleased when patients took turns for the worse. While I'd be calling doctors and adjusting medications, Marcus would suggest we wait and see. Give it time. No need to panic. Then Mrs. Patterson died. She was a sweet lady, 72 years old, recovering from routine heart surgery. Her prognosis was excellent. She should have gone home within a week. But on Marcus's 3rd night caring for her, she went into cardiac arrest at 3 in the morning. Marcus was the one who found her. Called the code blue, started CPR, did everything right. But it was too late. The family was devastated. Her daughter kept asking how this could happen when everything had been going so well. 2 weeks later, it was Mr. Rodriguez. Another routine case, another unexpected death on Marcus's watch. Then Mrs. Kim. All cardiac patients. All during the night shift when fewer staff members were around. I started paying closer attention to Marcus's routine. He was methodical, always following the same pattern. Check vitals, administer medications, update charts. But there were gaps. 20-minute periods where I couldn't account for his location. One night, I followed him during his rounds. He went into room 237, where Mr. Hoffman was sleeping peacefully. Post-surgery, stable condition, expected to recover fully. I watched through the small window in the door. Marcus stood by the bed for several minutes, just watching Mr. Hoffman sleep. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small syringe. Not from the medication cart, from his personal pocket. I couldn't see what was in the syringe, but I watched Marcus inject it into Mr. Hoffman's foreline. Then he stood back and waited, checking his watch like he was timing something. Mr. Hoffman started to stir. His breathing became labored. His heart monitor began showing irregular rhythms. Marcus watched it all with clinical interest, taking notes on a small pad. Only when Mr. Hoffman's condition became critical did Marcus hit the call button and summon help. By then, the patient was in distress, barely conscious, his vital signs erratic. I rushed in with the crash cart, but Marcus was already there, calmly explaining that the patient had taken a sudden turn. He'd done everything possible, followed all protocols. Just one of those unfortunate complications. Mr. Hoffman survived, but barely. He spent 3 days in intensive care before stabilizing. The doctors couldn't explain what had caused the episode. His blood work came back normal. No signs of infection or adverse drug reactions. But I knew what I'd seen. I reported Marcus to the head nurse the next morning. Told her about the syringe, the pattern of complications, the suspicious deaths. She listened politely and promised to look into it. Nothing happened. Marcus continued working his regular shifts. When I pressed for updates, I was told the investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing. Marcus's references were impeccable. His medication logs were perfect. Several patients had actually requested him specifically. That's when I realized how careful he'd been. Whatever he was injecting wasn't showing up in standard blood tests. His timing was perfect, always during the shift change when fewer people were paying attention. And he'd been doing this long enough to know exactly how much to use. I tried to document everything myself. Took photos when I could, kept detailed notes about patient conditions before and after Marcus's visits. But without concrete proof, I just looked like a paranoid colleague trying to sabotage a co-worker. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. Marcus was assigned to room 237 again, this time caring for a young woman named Sarah who'd had emergency heart surgery. 26 years old, mother of 2, fighting for her life. I couldn't let it happen again. That night, I hid in the supply closet across from room 237. At 2:30, Marcus made his rounds. I watched him enter Sarah's room with that same calm expression. Same routine. Stand by the bed, observe the patient, reach for the pocket syringe. I burst through the door just as he was about to inject whatever was in that syringe. Stop! Don't touch her. Marcus looked up, startled but not panicked. What are you doing? I'm administering her scheduled medication. That's not from the medication cart. I saw you take it from your pocket. He held up the syringe, perfectly composed. This is insulin. The patient is diabetic. It's clearly noted in her chart. I grabbed Sarah's chart. She wasn't diabetic. Marcus knew I'd caught him, but he just smiled. You seem stressed lately, he said quietly. Maybe you should consider taking some time off. This job can be overwhelming for some people. Security arrived within minutes. Marcus had called them while I was checking the chart. He explained calmly that I'd been acting erratically, making accusations, disrupting patient care. The syringe he'd been holding was indeed insulin, standard medication for diabetic patients. Except Sarah's chart had been altered. Someone had added diabetes to her medical history since I'd last checked it. I was suspended pending investigation. During the hearing, 3 other nurses testified that I'd been making unfounded accusations against Marcus for weeks. My behavior had become increasingly paranoid and disruptive. Marcus spoke on my behalf, actually. Said he was concerned about my mental health, that the stress of night shifts had clearly affected my judgment. He hoped I'd get the help I needed. My nursing license was revoked 6 months later. Official reason: psychiatric episode resulting in patient endangerment. But here's what they don't know. After I was fired, the unexplained complications in Marcus's section stopped completely. The mysterious cardiac episodes, the sudden deteriorations, the deaths that couldn't be explained. All of it stopped. Marcus transferred to another hospital last month. I've been tracking the obituaries in that area ever since. They're starting again. The dog walker. I need to tell someone about what happened when I was walking dogs last summer. The family still thinks their daughter ran away, but I know the truth. I know who took her. I started pet sitting through an app to make extra money. Good gig for a college student. Walk dogs, feed cats, water plants while people were on vacation. Easy work, flexible hours. The Hendersons hired me in July. Nice suburban family with a golden retriever named Buddy. They were going to Europe for 2 weeks and needed someone to walk him twice daily. Simple enough. Their house was in Maple Heights, one of those quiet neighborhoods where kids rode bikes and neighbors knew each other. Perfect place to raise a family. The Hendersons had a 12-year-old daughter named Lily. Sweet kid with braces and freckles. The first week went smoothly. I'd walk Buddy in the mornings before my summer classes, then again in the evenings. The neighborhood was peaceful. Tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, the occasional jogger or dog walker. But during the second week, I noticed someone else walking the same route. He was maybe 40 years old, average height, always wore a baseball cap and sunglasses. Had a small brown dog on a leash. At first, I figured he lived nearby, and we just happened to have similar schedules. But then I realized he was always there. Every morning at 8:30 when I walked Buddy. Every evening at 6. Same route, same timing. Too consistent to be coincidence. What made it worse was how he watched me. Not obvious staring, but I could feel his attention. When I'd stop to let Buddy sniff a fire hydrant, the man would slow down too. When I turned corners, he'd be there within a minute. I started varying my route to test my suspicions. If I went left instead of right at the park, he'd follow. If I took the long way around the block, so would he. Always keeping his distance, always pretending to focus on his dog. By Thursday, I was getting paranoid. Maybe I was imagining things. But when I mentioned it to my roommate, she told me to trust my instincts. If something felt wrong, it probably was. Friday morning, I decided to confront the situation. When I saw the man across the street, I waved and called out, "Nice dog. What breed is it?" He acted like he didn't hear me. Just kept walking, tugging his dog along faster than before. But I got a better look at him up close. Pale skin, thin face, nervous eyes that avoided direct contact. That evening, during Buddy's final walk, something happened that still gives me nightmares. We were passing the elementary school playground when Buddy started acting strange. His ears perked up, and he began pulling toward the swing sets. Not his usual behavior at all. I followed him across the grass. That's when I heard it. A muffled whimpering sound coming from the maintenance shed behind the school. I approached carefully, Buddy straining on his leash. The sound was definitely human. A child crying, trying to stay quiet. The shed door was slightly open. Through the gap, I could see someone inside. A small figure huddled in the corner. Blonde hair, pink shirt. It was Lily Henderson. My heart started racing. The Hendersons were supposed to be in Europe for another 3 days. Lily should have been staying with her grandmother across town. "Lily?" I whispered. "It's Sarah, the dog walker. Are you okay?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "He said my parents sent him to get me. But they didn't, did they?" Before I could answer, I heard footsteps on gravel. Someone was approaching the shed from behind. I turned around to see the man with the baseball cap, but now he wasn't holding a leash. His dog was nowhere in sight. "You shouldn't have come here," he said calmly. "This complicates things." I pulled out my phone to call 911, but he was already moving. Faster than I expected. He grabbed my wrist and twisted until I dropped the phone. "Lily, run!" I screamed. "Run to the street and find help." She scrambled past us and ran toward the main road. The man looked between me and her escaping figure, calculating. Then he shoved me hard against the shed wall and took off after her. I grabbed my phone and called the police while chasing them both. By the time I reached the street, Lily was safe in a neighbor's house and the man had disappeared. The investigation revealed he'd been watching the Henderson family for months. He knew their vacation schedule, knew that Lily was staying with her grandmother, knew exactly when to approach her. But here's what terrifies me the most. When police searched his apartment, they found detailed files on dozens of families in the neighborhood. Photos of children, school schedules, family routines. All gathered over months of careful observation. And in every file, there were notes about the family's pets. Dog walking schedules, pet sitter arrangements, vacation plans. He'd been using dog walking as cover to scout potential victims. Just another neighbor walking his pet, blending into the suburban routine. No one questions a man with a dog. The police told me I probably saved Lily's life. But I can't stop thinking about all those other files. All those other families he'd been watching. They never found the small brown dog he'd been walking. Turns out it wasn't his. It was a stray he'd been using as a prop. When he didn't need the disguise anymore, he just let it go. I quit the pet sitting job immediately. Couldn't handle walking through those quiet neighborhoods anymore. Every person with a dog looked suspicious. Every friendly neighbor might be studying my routine. The scariest part? He'd been doing this for months, and nobody noticed. Not the parents, not the neighbors, not even the police who occasionally patrolled the area. Just another dog walker taking his morning stroll. Perfectly normal. Completely invisible. Until he wasn't. The rideshare driver. I have to tell someone what really happened that night in October. The police report says I was drunk and confused, but I know what I experienced. I know what that driver was planning to do to me. I was working late at the office, finishing a presentation for the next morning. By the time I left, it was almost midnight and raining hard. My car was in the shop, so I called for a rideshare. The app said my driver was Kevin, 5-star rating, driving a blue Honda. When he pulled up, everything looked normal. Clean car, friendly greeting, knew my destination. I got in the back seat, and we started driving. For the first 10 minutes, Kevin was chatty. Asked about my work, the weather, typical driver small talk. But then his questions got more personal. Did I live alone? Work late often? Have family in the area? I gave vague answers and put in earbuds to signal I wanted quiet. But through the music, I could hear him talking on the phone. Quiet conversation in a language I didn't recognize. He kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. About halfway home, I realized we weren't taking the usual route. Instead of the highway, Kevin had chosen back roads through industrial areas. When I asked why, he said there was construction ahead and this was faster. But my phone's GPS showed no construction. The main route was clear. Actually, can we take the highway instead? I'm not comfortable with this route. Kevin smiled in the mirror. Don't worry. I know these roads better than the app. We'll be there soon. He didn't change direction. I started paying closer attention to our surroundings. We were in a part of town I'd never seen before. Warehouses, empty lots, no streetlights. The kind of place where nobody would hear you scream. That's when I noticed the door locks. Kevin had engaged the child safety locks. I couldn't open my door from the inside. My heart started racing. I tried to stay calm, act normal. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this really was a shortcut. But then Kevin made another phone call. This time I caught a few English words mixed in with the foreign language. Yes, I have her. 20 minutes. Same place as last time. I felt sick. Same place as last time. How many other women had he done this to? I pretended to be asleep, hoping he'd think I wasn't paying attention. Through barely open eyes, I watched him turn into an industrial complex. No businesses, no security cameras, just empty buildings and darkness. He parked behind a warehouse, far from the main road. Killed the engine and sat there for a moment, checking his phone. We're here, he said cheerfully. This isn't my address, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I know. We need to make a quick stop first. Won't take long. That's when I saw the other car. A white van parked in the shadows about 50 feet away. Someone got out and started walking toward us. A man I'd never seen before, carrying something in his hand. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I lunged forward and grabbed Kevin's phone from the dashboard. He tried to stop me, but I managed to call 911 before he could wrestle it away. Help me. I'm trapped in a rideshare car at... Kevin yanked the phone away and ended the call. But I'd gotten enough out. The 911 operator would have my location from the phone's GPS. The man from the van was almost at our car. Kevin was shouting at him in that foreign language, gesturing frantically. They were arguing about something, probably about what to do with me now that I'd called for help. I started screaming and pounding on the windows. Kevin tried to grab me to cover my mouth, but I fought him off. The man from the van was pulling on the door handles, trying to get in. That's when we heard the sirens. Kevin and the other man looked at each other for a split second, then ran in opposite directions. Kevin didn't even turn off the car, just abandoned it and disappeared into the darkness. Police found me locked in the back seat, hysterical but unharmed. They traced the license plates to a stolen vehicle. Kevin's rideshare profile was fake, created with stolen documents and a fake photo. The white van was gone by the time police secured the area. But they found things in the warehouse that made my blood run cold. Restraints, plastic sheeting, cleaning supplies, a mattress with dark stains that I didn't want to think about. The detective told me they'd been tracking a pattern of missing women who'd all used rideshare services late at night. All had gotten into cars that didn't match the app descriptions. All had vanished without a trace. I was lucky. I'd made that phone call just in time. But here's what keeps me awake at night. Before the police arrived, while I was trapped in that car, I heard Kevin and the other man talking. They mentioned names. Other women. Discussed them like they were inventory. How many others had sat in that same back seat, realized too late what was happening, and never made it home. The investigation went nowhere. Kevin disappeared completely. The warehouse was cleaned out within days. No arrests, no leads, no justice for the women who weren't as lucky as I was. I don't use rideshares anymore. Can't trust getting into a stranger's car. But sometimes I wonder how many fake drivers are still out there, using those apps to find victims. How many women are getting into cars right now, thinking they're safe, not realizing the doors won't open from the inside. I was one phone call away from becoming another missing person case. One phone call away from joining those women whose families are still waiting for answers. Check your driver's photo. Verify the license plate. Make sure the doors unlock. And if something feels wrong, trust your instincts. Because sometimes the person offering to help you get home safely is the last person you'll ever see. I need to tell someone what I found in storage unit 47B. The police closed the case, said there wasn't enough evidence. But I know what I saw. I know what was happening in that concrete room. My aunt died last spring and left me her storage unit. She'd been paying for it for 15 years, but nobody knew what was inside. Just boxes of old memories, we figured. Photo albums, holiday decorations, that sort of thing. The facility was called Secure Store, one of those bland concrete buildings with rows of metal roll-up doors. My aunt's unit was in the back corner, away from the main entrance. Unit 47B. When I first opened it, the smell hit me immediately. Stale air and something else. Something organic and wrong. Like meat that had been left out too long. The unit was packed floor to ceiling with cardboard boxes. Dozens of them, all labeled in my aunt's neat handwriting. Christmas 1987. Mom's China. Photo albums 1970s. Normal stuff. But in the far corner, hidden behind stacks of boxes, was something that didn't belong. A large plastic container, the kind used for storing winter clothes. It wasn't labeled like the others. When I opened it, I found photographs. Hundreds of them. All black and white, all showing the same thing. People sleeping. In beds, on couches, in cars. Close-up shots of their faces, peaceful and unaware. At first, I thought they were artistic photos. Maybe my aunt had been a photography student or something. But as I looked closer, I realized these weren't posed shots. These people had no idea they were being photographed. The photos were organized by location. One stack showed people sleeping in what looked like hospital rooms. Another showed children in their bedrooms. A third showed adults in hotel rooms, still wearing their clothes like they'd passed out drunk. At the bottom of the container was a leather journal. My aunt's handwriting, but not the cheerful cursive I remembered from birthday cards. This was different, clinical, methodical. Each entry was dated and included detailed observations. Sleep patterns, breathing rates, how long subjects stayed unconscious. She'd been studying people while they slept, documenting them like specimens. But the entries from the last 5 years were different, more personal. She'd started focusing on specific individuals, visiting them repeatedly, following their routines, learning their schedules. One name appeared over and over, Michael Chun, apartment 4B at Riverside Commons. According to the journal, my aunt had been watching Michael for 2 years. She knew when he worked, when he slept, when he left his apartment. She'd even figured out how to get inside. The most recent entry was dated just a week before she died. Subject appears to be getting suspicious. Found bedroom window unlocked twice this week. May need to be more careful or consider permanent solution. Permanent solution. What did that mean? I called Michael Chen's apartment complex. The woman in the office told me he'd moved out suddenly last month. Left most of his belongings behind, didn't give a forwarding address. Just disappeared one day. That's when I found the second container. This one was hidden even deeper in the storage unit, behind boxes labeled winter coats. Inside were personal items that clearly didn't belong to my aunt. A man's wallet, house keys, a cell phone, and more photographs. These pictures weren't of people sleeping. They showed someone's apartment, photographed from different angles like a real estate listing. But there were signs of a struggle. Overturned furniture, dark stains on the carpet, broken glass. The wallet belonged to Michael Chin. I took everything to the police immediately. Showed them the photographs, the journal entries, the personal items. They listened politely and said they'd investigate. 2 weeks later, they called to say the case was closed. They'd contacted Michael Chin, and he was fine, living with relatives out of state. The photographs were just an elderly woman's eccentric hobby. The personal items were probably gifts or belongings she'd offered to store for him. But I know they never actually spoke to Michael Chin, because when I called the number they claimed to have reached him at, it went straight to voicemail. A generic message that could have been recorded by anyone. I started doing my own investigation. Went to Michael's old apartment complex, talked to neighbors, tried to piece together what really happened. His next-door neighbor remembered hearing sounds from his apartment the night before he supposedly moved out. Furniture being dragged across the floor. A loud thud like something heavy falling. Then silence. The maintenance man told me they'd had to replace the carpet in Unit 4B after Michael left. Said it was water damaged, but couldn't explain where the water had come from. And the security guard mentioned that an elderly woman had been seen in the building several times during the weeks before Michael disappeared. Always late at night, always alone. She claimed to be visiting her nephew, but nobody could verify which apartment she was going to. I think my aunt graduated from watching people sleep to something much worse. I think Michael Chin figured out what she was doing and confronted her. And I think she decided he was too dangerous to let live. But here's what terrifies me most. When I was going through those photographs, I recognized some of the locations. The hospital where I work. The apartment building where my ex-boyfriend lives. The hotel where I stayed during a business trip last year. My aunt hadn't just been watching strangers. She'd been watching people connected to me, learning about my life through the people around me. In the very last entry in her journal, she'd written something that made my blood freeze. Subject's niece shows similar interest in nocturnal observation. Maybe hereditary trait worth exploring. She'd been watching me too. And now that she's gone, someone needs to continue her work. Yesterday, I found a new journal on my kitchen table. Same leather binding, same type of pen. The first page had today's date and a single line written in handwriting that looked exactly like my aunt's. New subject identified. Beginning observation phase. I live alone. I always lock my doors. But somehow, someone got inside my apartment and left me a message. Someone who learned everything they needed to know from my aunt's detailed notes. Someone who's been watching me sleep. The substitute teacher. I have to tell someone what I discovered about the substitute teacher at Lincoln Elementary. The school board says I'm a disgruntled employee making false accusations, but I know what I saw. I know what he was doing to those children. My name is Janet Collins, and I've been a third-grade teacher for 12 years. Last October, our school hired a new substitute teacher named Mr. Harrison. The kids loved him immediately. He was young, energetic, great with technology. Everything a modern teacher should be. Mr. Harrison subbed for different classes throughout the district, but he requested Lincoln Elementary most often. Said he enjoyed the school culture, liked working with our age group. The principal was thrilled to have such a reliable substitute. I first met him when he covered my class during a doctor's appointment. When I returned, my students couldn't stop talking about him. How he'd taught them a new computer game, how funny he was, how he'd given them special stickers with their names on them. The stickers bothered me. They were unusual. Thick, almost like temporary tattoos, with the child's full name printed in small letters. When I asked where he'd gotten personalized stickers for 23 different students, he said he'd made them himself. I like to make each child feel special, he explained. Personal touches matter at this age. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Mr. Harrison was substituting more frequently, always requesting the same teachers, always working with elementary grades. Never middle school or high school. Always the youngest children. Then I started hearing complaints from parents. Not serious ones, just odd little things. Their children were asking strange questions at home. About where they lived, who else lived there, what their parents' work schedules were like. When parents asked where these questions were coming from, the kids said Mr. Harrison had been teaching them about family structures and community helpers. Perfectly innocent educational topics. But the questions were too specific, too focused on identifying when children would be home alone or which parents traveled for work. I mentioned my concerns to the principal, Mrs. Davis. She brushed them off. Mr. Harrison was popular with students and parents. His background checks were clean. He was exactly the kind of energetic young teacher they needed. That's when I decided to do some investigating on my own. During my lunch break, I searched for Mr. Harrison online. His social media profiles were sparse but normal. Recent graduate, education major, lots of photos with children from various classrooms. Everything seemed legitimate, but when I dug deeper, I found something troubling. Mr. Harrison had worked at 4 different school districts in the past 2 years. Each time, he'd left after complaints from parents. Nothing formal, nothing documented. Just enough concerns that administrators quietly stopped calling him for substitute work. I contacted teachers from his previous schools. The stories were always similar. Great with kids, very engaged, but asked too many personal questions. Made children uncomfortable with requests for home addresses and family information. Parents complained about their kids coming home with detailed questions about household routines. One teacher in Denver told me something that made my blood run cold. A few months after Mr. Harrison stopped substituting at her school, there had been several break-ins in the neighborhood. Nothing violent, nothing stolen. Someone had just gone through houses, looked through family photos, personal documents. Like they were gathering information. Police never connected it to the school, but the timing was suspicious. I shared this information with Mrs. Davis. She said I was overreacting. Mr. Harrison was doing excellent work. The children adored him. Without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, she couldn't take action based on rumors from other districts. But I kept watching, and I noticed patterns. Mr. Harrison always volunteered for bus duty, walking children to their rides home. He'd chat with them about which stops they got off at, who picked them up, whether they walked home alone. During recess, he'd engage kids in conversations about their neighborhoods. Which houses had dogs, which parents were home during the day, which families went on vacation regularly. He also had an unusual interest in our school's emergency contact forms. Always offered to help update them, asked detailed questions about backup guardians and family structures. The breaking point came in November. I was staying late to grade papers when I heard someone in the computer lab. Mr. Harrison was supposed to have left hours earlier, but there he was, logged into the school's student database. I watched from the hallway as he scrolled through student records. Home addresses, parent contact information, emergency contacts. He was taking photos of the screen with his personal phone. When I confronted him, he had a ready explanation. He was updating his substitute teacher files, making sure he had current information for students he might teach. Just being thorough and prepared. But substitute teachers don't need home addresses. They don't need parent work schedules or emergency contact details. I reported the incident immediately. Mrs. Davis promised to investigate, but nothing happened. Mr. Harrison continued substituting. The computer lab incident was explained as a misunderstanding. That's when I realized I was on my own. I started following up with parents whose children had been in Mr. Harrison's classes. Asked casual questions about whether they'd noticed anything unusual, whether their kids had mentioned him outside of school. 3 families reported the same thing. Their children had received friend requests on social media from fake accounts. The profiles use photos of young people, claimed to be teenagers or college students. But the accounts had been created recently and showed unusual interest in the children's daily routines. When parents blocked the accounts, new ones would appear within days. Always asking the same types of questions Mr. Harrison had been teaching the children to discuss. I compiled everything and took it to the police. They listened politely, but said there wasn't enough evidence for criminal charges. Social media requests weren't illegal. Teachers asking about students' home lives wasn't necessarily suspicious. But they agreed to do a background check on Mr. Harrison that went deeper than the school district's standard screening. What they found was terrifying. Mr. Harrison's real name was David Park. He'd been using false credentials and references to get substitute teaching positions across multiple states. His actual background included arrests for stalking and voyeurism, charges that had been dropped on technicalities. He wasn't a certified teacher. He'd never attended education school. He was a predator who'd figured out how to infiltrate school systems. By the time police arrived at his apartment, David Park had disappeared. Left behind boxes of files on hundreds of children from 6 different school districts. Photos, home addresses, family schedules, detailed notes about which children were most vulnerable. The FBI is still investigating how many schools he infiltrated and how many families he targeted. But they've confirmed that several break-ins near his former schools were connected to information he'd gathered from students. He's never been found. The case is still open. The moving company. I need to warn people about Premier Moving Services. They have 5-star reviews online and reasonable prices, but I know what really happens when you hire them. I know what they do when they're alone in your house. Last month, I moved from Portland to Seattle for a new job. Found Premier Moving through an app that compared local companies. Their quote was competitive, and they had excellent customer reviews. Everything seemed legitimate. The crew arrived on time. 3 men in matching uniforms, professional equipment, proper moving truck. The foreman, Carl, was polite and efficient. Walked through my apartment, made notes about fragile items, explained the process clearly. I had to leave for work during the move. Carl assured me this was normal. Many clients preferred not to watch the packing process. They'd lock up when finished and drop the keys at my office downtown. Everything went smoothly. When I arrived in Seattle that evening, my belongings were already there, carefully arranged in my new apartment. Nothing broken, nothing missing. I was impressed with their service. But a week later, I started noticing strange things. Items in my new apartment weren't quite where I'd left them. Subtle changes. A book moved from one shelf to another. Kitchen utensils in different drawers. My laptop in a slightly different position on the desk. At first, I blamed moving stress. New environment, unfamiliar surroundings. Easy to forget where you'd put things. Then I found the photos. I was unpacking a box of personal documents when I discovered a manila envelope that didn't belong to me. Inside were dozens of photographs of my old apartment. Not the kind you'd take for insurance purposes. These were detailed shots of personal items. Photos of my prescription bottles with labels clearly visible. My computer screen showing email passwords I'd written on sticky notes. Bank statements laid out on my kitchen table. Even pictures of my underwear drawer, organized by color and style. Someone had systematically photographed my most private possessions. I called Premier Moving immediately. Carl sounded surprised and concerned. Said he'd never seen anything like this before. Maybe another client's photos had gotten mixed in with my belongings by mistake. But when I described the photos, his explanation fell apart. These weren't random pictures. They were specifically of my apartment, my belongings, my personal information. Carl promised to investigate and call me back. He never did. I tried calling the company's main number. Disconnected. Their website was down. The moving truck I'd seen had no permanent address painted on the side, just magnetic signs that could be removed. Premier Moving Services had vanished completely. That's when I realized what had really happened. While I was at work, the moving crew hadn't just packed my belongings. They'd cataloged my entire life. Photographed everything that could be useful for identity theft, insurance fraud, or burglary. They knew my medical conditions from the prescription bottles. They had my banking information from statements I'd left on the counter. They'd photographed credit cards, social security documents, birth certificates. Everything needed to steal my identity. But it got worse. A week later, someone tried to open a credit card in my name, then a checking account. Then they attempted to file a fraudulent insurance claim on items they claimed were damaged during my move. Items they knew I owned because they'd photographed them. I spent months cleaning up the financial damage. Credit monitoring, fraud alerts, police reports. But the identity theft was just the beginning. 3 months after my move, I came home to find my apartment had been broken into. Nothing valuable was stolen, but someone had gone through my personal belongings methodically. Photos, albums, computer files, personal documents. They were looking for something specific, something they'd seen in those photographs but hadn't been able to steal during the move. The police investigation led nowhere. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no evidence. But I knew who was responsible. I started researching Premier Moving Services online. What I found was terrifying. The company name appeared in complaints across multiple states, but always with different phone numbers and addresses. They'd operate in a city for a few months, target vulnerable clients, then disappear and reopen somewhere else. Many of their victims were young professionals like me. People moving to new cities, starting new jobs, often living alone. Perfect targets for someone who needed time to go through personal belongings without interruption. The pattern was always the same. Professional crew, reasonable prices, excellent initial service. Then identity theft, fraudulent accounts, and break-ins months later when victims had settled into their new lives. I found a victim support group online. Dozens of people who'd hired moving companies with similar names. Premier Movers, Professional Moving, Priority Moving Services. All connected to the same criminal operation. One woman in Denver told me her story. 6 months after her move, Someone had used her identity to rent an apartment, open utility accounts, even get a driver's license. The thieves had enough personal information to convince authorities they were legitimate. Another victim in Phoenix discovered someone had been living in a rental property, using his name and credit history. When he tried to fix the situation, landlords and creditors treated him like the criminal. The FBI confirmed that organized moving scams were becoming more common. Criminal groups would pose as legitimate companies, gain access to homes, and steal personal information instead of physical property. But prosecuting them was nearly impossible. By the time victims realized what had happened, the companies had dissolved and reformed under new names in different states. I'm sharing this story because I want people to know what to watch for. If a moving company offers prices that seem too good to be true, if they insist on working while you're not home, if they ask unusually detailed questions about your personal life, trust your instincts. Don't let strangers have unsupervised access to your most private possessions. Don't leave important documents lying around during a move. And always research companies thoroughly before you hire them. Because sometimes the people you trust to help you start a new life are the same ones who want to steal the old one. Last week, I saw a truck in my new neighborhood with magnetic signs reading Premium Moving Solutions. Different name, same basic setup. 3 men in matching uniforms, professional equipment, competitive prices. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the truck was gone. No license plate number, no permanent business address. They're still out there, targeting new victims in new cities. Still taking photos, still stealing identities, still destroying lives one move at a time. And somewhere in their files, they still have detailed pictures of everything I own. I have to tell someone about the food delivery driver who's been coming to my apartment. The police say there's no crime being committed, but I know something's wrong. I know he's planning something terrible. It started 3 months ago when I moved into a new apartment complex. I work from home and order delivery food regularly. Usually different restaurants, different drivers, no problems. But then I started noticing the same delivery driver showing up repeatedly, even when I ordered from completely different restaurants across town. His name was Marcus according to the apps, and he always drove a beat-up white sedan. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. Maybe he worked for multiple delivery services or had routes in my area. But it happened too often to be random. Marcus was always friendly, maybe too friendly. He'd linger at my door longer than necessary, making small talk about the weather or asking how I liked the food. Normal conversation, but something about his attention felt focused and deliberate. After a few weeks, I started noticing he was learning things about me. He'd comment on my work schedule, mention that I seemed to order food at the same times each day. Once he asked if I lived alone, claiming he wanted to make sure he was delivering to the right person. The questions made me uncomfortable, but I didn't want to be rude. Food delivery workers deal with difficult customers all day. I figured he was just being thorough. But then the delivery times started getting weird. Marcus would text that he was running late, then show up at odd hours. 9:30 at night for lunch orders. Early morning for dinner deliveries. Always with explanations about traffic or restaurant delays that didn't quite make sense. When I checked the apps, my orders showed normal delivery times. But Marcus would arrive hours before or after the estimated window, claiming there had been system errors. One evening, he delivered Chinese food at 11 p.m. that I'd ordered for lunch. When I pointed out the timing was wrong, he said the restaurant had been backed up all day, and he was just now getting to my order. But the food was hot, freshly prepared, not something that had been sitting around for 8 hours. I started paying closer attention to his behavior. Marcus would often park across the street before making deliveries, sitting in his car for 10 or 15 minutes. When I looked out my window, I'd see him watching my building with binoculars. When I asked why he was waiting so long to bring the food up, he'd say he was checking the address or waiting for another delivery in the same building. But I never saw him deliver to other apartments. The breaking point came last week when I ordered pizza for a Friday night movie. The app said delivery would be around 7 p.m. At 6:30, I heard a key in my door lock. Someone was trying to get into my apartment. I looked through the peephole and saw Marcus in the hallway, holding what looked like a key card. He was sliding it through the electronic lock mechanism on my door, trying different angles and speeds. When the lock didn't open, he knocked and called out, "Pizza delivery." I didn't answer, just watched through the peephole as he tried the key card again. After a few minutes, he left the pizza by my door and walked away. I immediately called the police. When they arrived, Marcus was gone, but the pizza was still there. The officers took my statement, but said attempting to use a key card wasn't necessarily criminal. Maybe he had a universal delivery key from the management company. But when I called my apartment complex, they said they'd never issued delivery keys to food service workers. Only maintenance staff and emergency personnel had access cards. That's when I realized Marcus had been planning this for months. Learning my schedule, figuring out when I'd be home alone, trying to get a key to my apartment. I started researching him online. The delivery apps showed his driver profile, but the photo looked different from the person who'd been coming to my door. Different facial structure, different eye color. Someone was using a stolen or fake delivery driver account. I contacted the restaurants directly. None of them had a driver named Marcus on staff. When I described him, they had no idea who I was talking about. The man who'd been delivering my food wasn't working for any restaurant. He was intercepting real delivery orders, probably paying the actual drivers for the food, then bringing it to me himself. But why go through such elaborate effort just to deliver food? The answer came when I found a small camera device stuck under the doorframe outside my apartment. Hidden behind the unit number, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Marcus hadn't just been delivering food. He'd been studying my routine, recording my activities, trying to get inside my apartment. The police investigation revealed that several women in the area had reported similar experiences. The same delivery driver showing up repeatedly, asking personal questions, arriving at strange hours. But by the time they started looking for him, Marcus had disappeared. The car he'd been driving was stolen. The delivery driver profile was created with fake documents. They never found him. But yesterday, something happened that made my blood run cold. I ordered food from a new restaurant across town, using a different delivery app with extra security settings. At 7 p.m., there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw a different person this time. Young woman, legitimate uniform, proper delivery bag. But when she handed me the food, she said something that made me freeze. Marcus says hello. He wanted me to tell you he'll see you soon. I slammed the door and called the police immediately. But when they questioned the delivery driver, she claimed she'd never said anything about Marcus. Just standard food delivery, nothing unusual. The restaurant confirmed they'd sent her with my order. She was a legitimate employee with no connection to my previous experiences. But I know what I heard. Marcus is still out there, still watching, still planning, and now he's recruiting other people to help him. I've stopped ordering delivery food completely, changed my locks, installed extra security cameras, even considered moving again. But I can't shake the feeling that it won't matter. Marcus has had months to study me, to learn my patterns, to figure out how I think. Wherever I go, whatever precautions I take, he'll find a way to get close again. Because he's not just a delivery driver anymore. He's become something much worse. The home inspector. I need to tell someone about the home inspector who came to my house last month. The real estate company says he was legitimate, but I know what he was really doing. I know what he installed while he was alone in my basement. My husband and I were selling our house in March. After 15 years, we'd outgrown the 3-bedroom colonial and wanted something bigger. Our realtor recommended getting a pre-inspection to identify any issues before listing. She gave us a card for Thompson Home Inspections. Licensed, bonded, excellent reviews online. The inspector, Gary Thompson, seemed professional when he called to schedule the appointment. Gary arrived on time, wearing a company polo shirt and carrying proper equipment. Digital camera, moisture detector, electrical tester. Everything looked legitimate. He explained the process would take 3 to 4 hours, and we were welcome to stay or leave. My husband had to work, but I decided to run errands while Gary did his inspection. He said he'd text when finished and lock up using the spare key we kept under the front planner. When I returned 4 hours later, Gary was gone. He'd left a detailed report on the kitchen counter highlighting minor issues. Loose handrail, small roof leak, outdated electrical outlet. Nothing major. The kind of problems you'd expect in an older house. But that night, I started hearing sounds from the basement. Soft clicking noises, like someone typing on a keyboard. But we didn't have a computer down there. Just storage boxes and our old exercise equipment. When I went to investigate, everything looked normal. The sound stopped as soon as I turned on the lights. I figured it was just the house settling, or maybe mice in the walls. But the clicking sounds continued every night. Always around midnight. Always for exactly 20 minutes. Then silence. After a week, I convinced my husband to check the basement thoroughly. We moved boxes, looked behind the furnace, examined every corner. That's when we found it. Hidden behind the water heater was a small device I'd never seen before. About the size of a smartphone, with blinking LED lights and what looked like a tiny antenna. It was plugged into an electrical outlet that had been concealed behind a storage shelf. My husband thought it might be some kind of monitoring device left by the previous owners. Maybe for the security system or temperature control. But when we called our security company, they said they'd never installed anything like that. The device wasn't connected to our home systems at all. I remembered Gary had spent a lot of time in the basement during his inspection. Said he was checking the foundation and electrical systems. But now I wondered what else he'd been doing down there. We took the device to a computer repair shop. The technician's face went pale when he examined it. "This is a cellular data collector," he explained. "It's designed to intercept and record wireless signals. Wi-Fi passwords, phone calls, text messages, anything transmitted within about a 100-foot radius." My stomach dropped. "How long has it been active?" "Based on the data logs, about 3 weeks. Since early March." That was exactly when Gary had done our home inspection. The technician showed us what the device had been collecting. Our laptop passwords, banking information entered on phones, private text conversations, even photos we'd shared over our home network. Everything we'd done digitally for 3 weeks had been recorded and transmitted to an external server. We called the police immediately. They took the device and started investigating Thompson home inspections. What they found was terrifying. Gary Thompson's license was legitimate, but it had been issued using stolen identity documents. The real Gary Thompson had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. Someone had been using his credentials to gain access to homes across the state. The police discovered similar devices in 12 other houses where fake Gary had conducted inspections. All the victims were families planning to sell their homes, giving strangers legitimate reasons to spend hours alone inside. But installing surveillance equipment was just the beginning. The investigation revealed that fake Gary was part of a larger criminal network. Once the data collectors gathered enough personal information, other members of the group would use it for identity theft, insurance fraud, and burglary. They knew when families were traveling based on calendar information synced to phones. They had house alarm codes from texts between spouses. They could predict when homes would be empty and valuable items would be unguarded. 5 families in our area had been burglarized in the past month. All had used Thompson home inspections. All had lost items specifically mentioned in private communications the data collectors had intercepted. But here's what keeps me awake at night. When police analyzed the data from our device, they found something that made my blood freeze. Fake Gary hadn't just been collecting our digital information. He'd been sharing it with specific individuals who lived in our neighborhood. People we knew. People we trusted. Our next-door neighbor had received detailed reports about our daily schedules. The couple across the street had gotten copies of our financial information. Even our dog walker had been sent updates about when we'd be away from home. People we interacted with every day had been getting real-time intelligence about our private lives. The police arrested fake Gary and 3 other members of his network. But they never found the person coordinating the operation, the one who decided which houses to target and which neighbors to recruit. We moved out of that neighborhood immediately. Couldn't stand the thought that people we'd trusted had been watching us, planning against us, waiting for the right moment to strike. But the damage was already done. Our identities had been compromised, our financial accounts accessed, our most private communications recorded. Fake Gary had spent 4 hours in our house and stolen 15 years of our lives. The real estate company apologized and said they'd been fooled by his professional credentials. They've since implemented better screening procedures for service providers. But I wonder how many other fake inspectors are out there. How many homes are being invaded by people who seem legitimate, but are really criminals in disguise. Last week, I got a call from a woman in Denver. She'd found my name in a police report and wanted to share her story. A home inspector had come to her house, spent hours alone, left surveillance equipment behind. The same equipment, the same methods, the same network. They're still operating, still recruiting neighbors, still targeting families who just want to sell their homes and move on with their lives. So if someone offers to inspect your house before you sell, check their credentials carefully. Verify their license. Ask for recent references. Stay home during the inspection, because the person you invite into your home might not be there to help you. They might be there to destroy you. The online tutor. I have to warn parents about the online tutoring service my daughter was using. Everyone thinks it's a legitimate education company, but I know what was really happening during those video sessions. I know what the tutor was actually teaching my child. My daughter Emma is 14 and struggles with algebra. When her grades started slipping last fall, I found Tutor Connect through a parenting forum. The reviews were excellent and the price was reasonable. $20 an hour for one-on-one video tutoring with certified teachers. Emma's assigned tutor was Mr. Peterson. Middle-aged, friendly voice, claimed to have 15 years of teaching experience. The video sessions were conducted through the company's secure platform, which parents couldn't access for privacy reasons. At first, Emma's grades improved dramatically. She seemed more confident about math, even excited about her homework. I was thrilled that we'd found such an effective tutor. But after a few weeks, I noticed changes in Emma's behavior. She became secretive about her tutoring sessions, always closing her bedroom door and speaking in whispers during the calls. When I asked about her lessons, she'd give vague answers and change the subject quickly. Emma also started asking strange questions about our family. Whether I worked late often, when her father traveled for business, if we had security cameras in the house. She claimed Mr. Peterson was teaching her about family dynamics and personal safety. When I suggested sitting in on a session to see how the tutoring worked, Emma became agitated. Said Mr. Peterson had explained that parental observation made students nervous and interfered with learning. The sessions needed to be private for maximum effectiveness. That explanation seemed reasonable, but something felt wrong. One evening, I heard Emma's session through her bedroom door. Instead of discussing algebra, I heard Mr. Peterson asking about her daily routine. What time she got home from school, whether she was ever alone in the house, which neighbors she knew well. I knocked on Emma's door to check on her. She quickly minimized the video chat and claimed they'd been taking a break from math to talk about time management skills. But I'd heard enough to know they weren't discussing academics. I decided to monitor Emma's computer usage more closely. Our router logs showed the tutoring sessions were lasting much longer than the scheduled hour. Sometimes 2 or 3 hours, always late at night when I thought Emma was asleep. The sessions were also happening on days when no tutoring was scheduled. Emma was having unauthorized conversations with Mr. Peterson, but paying for them through her own allowance money. When I confronted Emma about the extra sessions, she broke down crying. She admitted that Mr. Peterson had been teaching her things that had nothing to do with math. He'd been showing her inappropriate websites, asking her to pose for photos, and requesting detailed information about our household. He'd convinced her this was normal mentor behavior and that she shouldn't tell her parents because they wouldn't understand. Emma said Mr. Peterson had been grooming her for weeks, gradually introducing more personal topics and making her feel special and mature. He'd told her she was more intelligent than other students and deserved advanced lessons that regular tutors couldn't provide. He'd also been teaching her how to hide their conversations from parental monitoring software, how to delete browser history, use private messaging apps, and communicate without leaving digital traces. I immediately contacted the police and Tutor Connect. What they discovered was horrifying. Mr. Peterson wasn't a certified teacher. His real name was David Miller, a registered sex offender who'd been banned from working with children. He'd created a fake identity and infiltrated the tutoring platform using stolen credentials. Tutor Connect's background screening process was completely inadequate. They'd never verified his teaching credentials or conducted proper criminal checks. They'd basically allowed a predator unlimited access to vulnerable children. The investigation revealed that David had been targeting dozens of students through multiple tutoring platforms. He'd perfected a system for identifying isolated children with academic struggles and busy parents. He would gradually gain their trust through legitimate tutoring, then slowly introduce inappropriate content while convincing them to keep secrets from their families. Many children never reported the abuse because they believed they were willing participants in advanced educational programs. Police found hundreds of photos and videos David had collected from students across the country. Children who thought they were participating in science experiments or art projects had actually been producing material for his personal collection. Emma was lucky. We caught the situation before it escalated to physical contact. But other families weren't as fortunate. The FBI investigation uncovered a network of fake tutors operating across multiple states. They'd been using legitimate tutoring platforms to access children in their homes, behind closed doors, with minimal parental supervision. David and 3 other members of his network were arrested, but prosecutors said many more predators were likely operating similar schemes. The online tutoring industry had virtually no regulation or oversight. Tutor Connect shut down immediately after the arrests became public. But within weeks, similar companies had appeared with different names and the same basic business model. Cheap tutoring, minimal screening, maximum privacy for tutor-student interactions. Emma has been in therapy for 6 months. She's recovering, but the experience has changed her relationship with technology and trust. She's afraid to use educational websites or participate in video calls for legitimate school activities. I'm sharing this story because I want other parents to know the warning signs. If your child becomes secretive about tutoring sessions, if grades improve too quickly, if the tutor requests information about family schedules or household security, trust your instincts. Legitimate tutors focus on academics. They welcome parental involvement. They don't need to know personal details about your family or schedule private sessions outside contracted hours. Most importantly, never allow tutoring sessions to happen behind closed doors without oversight. Use platforms that allow parental monitoring. Sit in on sessions periodically. Ask specific questions about lesson content, because the person you're paying to educate your child might actually be teaching them things that will haunt them forever. And the worst part, there are dozens of other fake tutoring companies operating right now, targeting children whose parents think they're investing in their education. Check credentials, verify identities, monitor sessions, because your child's safety is worth more than their algebra grade. The online tutor. I have to warn parents about the online tutoring service my daughter was using. Everyone thinks it's a legitimate education company, but I know what was really happening during those video sessions. I know what the tutor was actually teaching my child. My daughter Emma is 14 and struggles with algebra. When her grades started slipping last fall, I found Tutor Connect through a parenting forum. The reviews were excellent and the price was reasonable. $20 an hour for one-on-one video tutoring with certified teachers. Emma's assigned tutor was Mr. Peterson. Middle-aged, friendly voice, claimed to have 15 years of teaching experience. The video sessions were conducted through the company's secure platform, which parents couldn't access for privacy reasons. At first, Emma's grades improved dramatically. She seemed more confident about math, even excited about her homework. I was thrilled that we'd found such an effective tutor. But after a few weeks, I noticed changes in Emma's behavior. She became secretive about her tutoring sessions, always closing her bedroom door and speaking in whispers during the calls. When I asked about her lessons, she'd give vague answers and change the subject quickly. Emma also started asking strange questions about our family, whether I worked late often, when her father traveled for business, if we had security cameras in the house. She claimed Mr. Peterson was teaching her about family dynamics and personal safety. When I suggested sitting in on a session to see how the tutoring worked, Emma became agitated. Said Mr. Peterson had explained that parental observation made students nervous and interfered with learning. The sessions needed to be private for maximum effectiveness. That explanation seemed reasonable, but something felt wrong. One evening, I heard Emma's session through her bedroom door. Instead of discussing algebra, I heard Mr. Peterson asking about her daily routine. What time she got home from school, whether she was ever alone in the house, which neighbors she knew well. I knocked on Emma's door to check on her. She quickly minimized the video chat and claimed they'd been taking a break from math to talk about time management skills. But I'd heard enough to know they weren't discussing academics. I decided to monitor Emma's computer usage more closely. Our router logs showed the tutoring sessions were lasting much longer than the scheduled hour. Sometimes 2 or 3 hours, always late at night when I thought Emma was asleep. The sessions were also happening on days when no tutoring was scheduled. Emma was having unauthorized conversations with Mr. Peterson, but paying for them through her own allowance money. When I confronted Emma about the extra sessions, she broke down crying. She admitted that Mr. Peterson had been teaching her things that had nothing to do with math. He'd been showing her inappropriate websites, asking her to pose for photos, and requesting detailed information about our household. He'd convinced her this was normal mentor behavior, and that she shouldn't tell her parents because they wouldn't understand. Emma said Mr. Peterson had been grooming her for weeks, gradually introducing more personal topics and making her feel special and mature. He'd told her she was more intelligent than other students and deserved advanced lessons that regular tutors couldn't provide. He'd also been teaching her how to hide their conversations from parental monitoring software. how to delete browser history, use private messaging apps, and communicate without leaving digital traces. I immediately contacted the police and Tutor Connect. What they discovered was horrifying. Mr. Peterson wasn't a certified teacher. His real name was David Miller, a registered sex offender who'd been banned from working with children. He'd created a fake identity and infiltrated the tutoring platform using stolen credentials. Tutor Connect's background screening process was completely inadequate. They'd never verified his teaching credentials or conducted proper criminal checks. They'd basically allowed a predator unlimited access to vulnerable children. The investigation revealed that David had been targeting dozens of students through multiple tutoring platforms. He'd perfected a system for identifying isolated children with academic struggles and busy parents. He would gradually gain their trust through legitimate tutoring, then slowly introduce inappropriate content while convincing them to keep secrets from their families. Many children never reported the abuse because they believed they were willing participants in advanced educational programs. Police found hundreds of photos and videos David had collected from students across the country. Children who thought they were participating in science experiments or art projects had actually been producing material for his personal collection. Emma was lucky. We caught the situation before it escalated to physical contact. But other families weren't as fortunate. The FBI investigation uncovered a network of fake tutors operating across multiple states. They'd been using legitimate tutoring platforms to access children in their homes, behind closed doors, with minimal parental supervision. David and 3 other members of his network were arrested, but prosecutors said many more predators were likely operating similar schemes. The online tutoring industry had virtually no regulation or oversight. Tutor Connect shut down immediately after the arrests became public. But within weeks, similar companies had appeared with different names and the same basic business model. Cheap tutoring, minimal screening, maximum privacy for tutor-student interactions. Emma has been in therapy for 6 months. She's recovering, but the experience has changed her relationship with technology and trust. She's afraid to use educational websites or participate in video calls for legitimate school activities. I'm sharing this story because I want other parents to know the warning signs. If your child becomes secretive about tutoring sessions, if grades improve too quickly, if the tutor requests information about family schedules or household security, trust your instincts. Legitimate tutors focus on academics. They welcome parental involvement. They don't need to know personal details about your family or schedule private sessions outside contracted hours. Most importantly, never allow tutoring sessions to happen behind closed doors without oversight. Use platforms that allow parental monitoring. Sit in on sessions periodically. Ask specific questions about lesson content, because the person you're paying to educate your child might actually be teaching them things that will haunt them forever. And the worst part, there are dozens of other fake tutoring companies operating right now, targeting children whose parents think they're investing in their education. Check credentials, verify identities, monitor sessions, because your child's safety is worth more than their algebra grade. The study group. I need to warn people about what happened to my daughter's college study group. The university says it was a tragic accident, but I know the truth. I know what Professor Williams was really doing with those students. My daughter Jessica started her sophomore year at State University last fall. She was majoring in psychology and struggling with her statistics course. When a professor offered extra help through a private study group, Jessica was eager to join. Professor Williams taught advanced psychology courses and had excellent student reviews. He was young, maybe early 30s, with a PhD from a prestigious university. Students loved his engaging teaching style and willingness to provide additional support. The study group met every Thursday evening at Professor Williams's house near campus. Jessica said it was more comfortable than the library, and he provided snacks and coffee. 6 students total, all psychology majors having difficulty with quantitative methods. Jessica's grades improved immediately. She seemed more confident about statistics and was excited about her psychology coursework. I was proud that she'd found such a dedicated mentor. But after a few weeks, Jessica started acting differently. She became secretive about the study sessions, claiming they were covering advanced material that would be hard to explain. When I asked specific questions about what they were learning, She'd give vague answers about research methodology and data analysis. Jessica also seemed more tired than usual. She'd come home from study group sessions exhausted, sometimes forgetting conversations we'd had or struggling to remember basic information. I attributed it to academic stress and late-night studying. Then I noticed changes in her behavior that worried me. Jessica started questioning her own memory and judgment. She'd ask me to confirm conversations we'd had or events that had clearly happened. She seemed confused about timeline and uncertain about her own experiences. When I suggested she might be overworking herself, Jessica insisted the study group was helping her learn important skills. Professor Williams was teaching them about memory, consciousness, and human behavior. She was gaining insights that would make her a better psychologist. But Jessica couldn't explain what specific insights she was learning or how they related to her coursework. The breaking point came in November when Jessica called me from campus, crying and confused. She said she'd woken up in Professor Williams's house with no memory of how she'd gotten there. The last thing she remembered was arriving for the study session at 7 p.m. It was now 3 in the morning. Professor Williams told her she'd fallen asleep during a meditation exercise he'd been teaching the group. Said she'd been under stress and her mind needed rest. He'd let her sleep rather than wake her, just being considerate of her well-being. But Jessica's clothes were different from what she'd worn to the session, and she had no memory of changing. I drove to campus immediately and took Jessica to the hospital. The blood tests showed traces of sedatives in her system, drugs that weren't prescribed to her and that she had no memory of taking. When we reported the incident to campus police, they interviewed Professor Williams. He claimed Jessica had mentioned feeling anxious, and he'd given her an herbal supplement to help her relax. Said she must have had an adverse reaction to the natural ingredients. The other study group members corroborated his story. They all remembered Jessica taking the supplement willingly and falling asleep during a relaxation exercise. No one reported anything unusual or inappropriate. But when I pressed Jessica for details about previous study sessions, disturbing patterns emerged. She'd been experiencing memory gaps for weeks. Sessions that she remembered starting, but not finishing. Conversations with Professor Williams that seemed important, but that she couldn't recall in detail. The other students had been having similar experiences, but they'd all been told this was normal when learning advanced psychological techniques. Professor Williams had convinced them that memory disruption was part of understanding consciousness and human perception. I hired a private investigator to look into Professor Williams's background. What we discovered was terrifying. His PhD was legitimate, but his previous teaching positions had ended under suspicious circumstances. At his last university, 3 female students had filed complaints about inappropriate conduct during private tutoring sessions. The complaints had been dismissed due to lack of evidence, but the pattern was consistent. Students reported memory loss, confusion, and feeling violated after spending time alone with Professor Williams. The investigator also found that Professor Williams had been purchasing large quantities of sedative medications through online pharmacies, drugs that could cause memory loss and compliance when mixed with food or drinks. When we brought this evidence to the police, they searched Professor Williams's house. In his basement, they found video recording equipment and dozens of tapes labeled with student names and dates. The videos showed unconscious students in various states of undress, while Professor Williams conducted what he called psychological experiments. He'd been drugging his study group members and documenting their responses to different stimuli while they were unconscious. Jessica and the other 5 students had been his test subjects for months. None of them had any memory of the abuse because of the sedatives he'd been giving them. Professor Williams was arrested and charged with sexual assault, drugging victims, and creating illegal recordings. The investigation revealed similar crimes at his previous universities dating back 5 years. He'd perfected a system of targeting vulnerable students through academic support, gradually introducing drugs disguised as supplements or study aids, then exploiting their unconscious state while convincing them their memory problems were educational experiences. The university settled lawsuits with all 6 victims and implemented new policies for faculty-student interactions. But the damage was already done. Jessica spent months in therapy, trying to piece together what had happened to her. The memory gaps made it impossible to know the full extent of the abuse. She transferred to a different school and changed her major, unable to continue psychology studies. Professor Williams was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but I know there are others like him out there. Predators who use their academic authority to exploit students' trust and desire to succeed. The worst part is how easily he manipulated the situation. Students trusted him because he was a professor. They believed their symptoms were part of advanced learning because he was an expert in psychology. And when victims tried to report problems, he had witnesses who would vouch for his version of events. Students who had also been drugged but didn't realize it. Last month, I got a call from a mother in Colorado. Her daughter was having similar experiences with a psychology professor at her university. Memory gaps, confusion, feeling violated but unable to remember specifics. The professor was using different methods, but the same basic approach. Academic support, private sessions, gradual introduction of substances that affected memory and judgment. It's happening again. Somewhere else, with different victims, but the same predatory pattern.